Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast hosted by me, Lisa Fine, and Hema Lomax. Today, I am joined by Sarah Hadden to talk to two fabulous women about a topic that I've been thinking about a whole lot, what the next generation needs in ethics and compliance. This also, in all candor, comes along with a little trouble for me because it forces me to acknowledge that in Gen X, I'm not young. But with that said, I am just thrilled that we have two next generation superstars here, Rebecca Anker and Emily Frank. And with that, Rebecca and Emily, can you introduce yourselves and tell us about your background and where you are right now? Rebecca, let's just start with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca. This is my first podcast, so I'm very excited. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, so bringing a bit of a Canadian perspective to the podcast as well. I graduated from university about 3 years ago, and I just stumbled into compliance. My friend worked at the company, and she said, "Hey, we're hiring. You have a business degree. You're probably well suited for the role." So I interviewed, and now I absolutely love it, and I hope to stay in the industry for a while.
That's great. And Emily, what about you?
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me on here. This is awesome. And Rebecca, I'm glad you went first because I was curious about how long you had been in the workforce and didn't want to come out and ask. But I feel like unintentionally, we both sit on opposite ends of the younger generation. I have been out of college for a little bit longer than 3 years. I'm not going to say years, but I have worked in compliance for over 10 years. So not as long as some of the women that we have listened to on the Great Women in Compliance podcast, but a few years longer than Rebecca. I've worked at Newmont Mining, which is a gold mining company. I went from there to Yeti, which is the cooler and drinkware company. I went from there to Scout Motors, which is a up and coming EV company that's owned by Volkswagen. And now I'm at Cushman Wakefield, which is real estate. So I've been all over the place and excited to talk about even the changes I've seen and what I'm excited to see in compliance moving forward. So.
Great. Let's just start with how do you think your approach to ethics and compliance is impacted by your generation? And how do you think that is different than your more senior colleagues or podcast hosts here? Let's start with you, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think my generation, I'm in the millennial generation, elder millennial, if you really want to put a label on it. We've grown up in a world where technology and transparency and culture are super important. And when I entered the ethics and compliance field, it had already evolved past its earliest versions. And so because of that, I constantly go into new roles in my roles in ethics and compliance, expecting collaboration and openness. And I constantly push against hierarchy for hierarchy's sake, which I think is it's there. It still exists. I think compared to my more senior colleagues, I'm comfortable questioning whether a process makes sense. Are we doing it just because we've always done it that way? I like to focus on usability and clarity, not just documentation. Get beyond paper programs is my important line. And I see ethics as a living system. It's not a static program. It has to be ever evolving and ever changing. But I'm always appreciative that there is a foundation that the more senior compliance professionals have built, because without that, none of what we do and what I think about doing in the future would be possible.
Okay, Emily, you said, this is Sarah, by the way. Let me just jump in here. And I'll go ahead and I'll self-identify. You said you were an elder millennial. I guess that makes me an elder Gen X. I think I'm about as old as one can be and still claim to be one of those latchkey kids who is a Gen X. That's me. When you said you're pushing up against the hierarchy, I assume you're talking about the boomers.
Yes.
Gen X.
No, yes, it's the boomers. It is, and no offense to the boomers who are listening.
No
right?
offense to the boomers.
There is a very, I think, practiced structure of expected hierarchy that, especially when I got into the professional world, there was an expectation of like, oh no, you at the bottom of the ladder, do not ever try to jump rungs. Don't ever try to jump and talk to people above your station, if you will. Yeah. And so I never thought that was a productive way to work when I started. You do what you need to do when you're young and you're first into the professional field. But I keep trying to push against that. If I have an opportunity to talk to people who are way above me or way below me in either direction, talk to them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
That's where the magic happens in those conversations. And structure is important. We have to have a certain amount of structure. And thank you, boomers, for bringing that to the workplace. But we need to be able to move freely within it, don't we? It sounds like you've really nailed that in your organization.
I try. I will say I have only been with Cushman since the beginning of November. So I am still learning that organization. But in my roles, I do try to open up communication to all levels and not follow hierarchy.
And you're setting an example for others in the workplace as well for the what's next, what's after, I guess, Gen Z is the up and coming. So you're setting an example for the real entry level, right out of school people. And I guess, Rebecca, there I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm just on the cusp. I'm born in 2000. So whatever category you put that in. I know.
Whippersnapper. That's the category.
Just, sit here and just...
This is a podcast and not a video because I wouldn't want everyone seeing your faces right now.
Yeah, we're fanning ourselves. It could be hot flashes or it could be emotion. I don't know.
I'm just kidding. But Emily, I completely agree with you. I think like our generation is really good at questioning the status quo. I think compliance is viewed now as a bit of a control function, and we need to make the push to like a service function. I think we're used to having like transparency and speed and constant feedback. So as a generation, we expect compliance to be really accessible and being able to explain like the why behind certain policies and rules and being able to like meet people where they are. So I think the way that we compare to our more like senior colleagues is really just questioning why things are done the way that they are.
That's important, though. We need that, don't we? I mean, we need to question the status quo. I think there's a lot of room for that. And if that's something that you, others in your generation are confident about, then we need to listen.
I think it's absolutely true. And one of the things I think about in our generation, too, is we've been trying very hard in our minds to move from how we have been perceived as the sheriffs or the Department of No, and moving us to becoming much more collaborative, talking about ethics. So my question for you is, where do you think we are in that evolution? Are we moving that way? Are we less than we think we are? And what next? So Rebecca, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think we are slowly moving in that direction. I think like the annual kind of one size fits all training is a little bit outdated. And it heavily relies on policies that people are not always like revisiting. So I think programs that are focused more on like activity rather than impact, a little bit outdated as well. Like I think looking at like completion rates in certain programs versus like behavior change is a bit misaligned with the way that compliance is moving today.
Yeah. Emily, what about
you? Yeah, I would agree. I think we've come a long way from being that Department of No. We think the earlier generations, the older generations, I'm going to say the earlier generations. It sounds less old for you guys. No, I'm kidding.
A little softer.
A little softer, yeah. But I think like what Rebecca was saying, there's impact over activity. So the best compliance teams now are a mixture of problem solvers and enablers, and more than anything, partners to the business. And we as ethics and compliance professionals should never be gatekeepers. We should be guides. We should be builders of the systems that help people navigate rather than just telling people what to do and not explaining why and what the reason behind it is and what the impact to the business and to their personal contribution to the business is. I think some organizations will still drift to the Department of No under pressure. But as we continue to bring new blood into the workforce and the next generation keeps asking and pushing that status quo, there's that expectation that compliance is enablers. We're not road blockers, and that we're responding to and with innovation.
The way you break that down, I do. And so much of it, I think, is the individual, maybe their personality, their spirit that they bring to the role. and how they're perceived is born out of that. But to take on that persona as someone who is supposed to empower others and to be the enabler, as you described, makes so much sense. That's where we need to be right now, isn't it?
And I have a little follow-up on that as well. I think the one challenge that we all have is as we're trying to evolve into the directions that you're all talking about and asking the questions about, how do you think we best reconcile that with the requirements that come externally, which aren't keeping up as much? So there's sometimes that disconnect of what you need to do for your regulators or others versus like certain certification requirements or other things that don't go away. How do we best bridge that? Because sometimes there's the must-dos, and they may not keep up as quickly as how we want to do it for any generation. But what creative ideas do you have for that?
That's a big question. That's a big ask.
That's a tough one. Mm-hmm. I would say there's actually one company, I can't remember what they're called, but they were doing like a TV show for the code of conduct. And I think just finding ways to make that a little bit more creative can help bridge that gap. So just like finding fun ways to achieve certifications or giving people shout outs and doing things to make people feel appreciated will definitely help build that gap.
Yeah, and I would add to what Rebecca just said and say the shorter the better. We're past the hours-long trainings. So when you can incorporate it in short snippets, TV shows, cartoons, whatever makes it short and sweet but still gets the message across, I think that's the best place to do it. People don't realize that if they watch a 2-minute video once a week for an entire year, that equals far more than their 2-hour training that they would have taken on the code of conduct and everything around it. But they don't think about that at the end of the year when they're like, oh yeah, I remember watching that video on insert topic here. So the shorter and the sweeter and our attention spans, I think, prove that we can't expect employees to sit down and take hour-long trainings anymore. It's not possible.
I think we'll be seeing compliance TikToks soon. That's my for 2020.
Happening.
Yeah.
Absolutely happening. It's so obvious that there are generational differences in how we learn and how we communicate and how we embrace new technologies. And I don't think there's any more evidence than what we see with AI in the workplace. I'm presenting a webinar next week or week after next rather. And I was doing some pre-interviews and I was talking to a man who's a compliance professional for a giant technology company. And he commented that his workforce is very young, 75,000 employees around the world, and they're all quite young. And so embracing AI for them, smooth as can be. And then conversely, another panelist is in the steel industry. And he's like, Sarah, steel workers, this is an aging workforce. It's a completely different mentality. Getting them to embrace and get on board with AI, not so much. What are your comments about AI as relates to the generational differences in the workplace? Are you noticing adoption rates or things like that differing by generation? Emily?
Yeah. So
I don't mean adoption, like receptivity to it.
Yeah. And like how it can play into compliance. And yeah. I mean, I think there's still some hesitation across the board from compliance professionals of just wholeheartedly adapting AI because there's a lot of questions that we just don't know about it. But on the opposite side of things, I already have seen indications where AI can be super useful and we should be figuring out the best way to use it to take away some of the busy work that doesn't need to be on humans, that can be more machine completed. Flagging things, putting it into reporting systems, I think is going to be important. But I think too, going back to what Rebecca said, you have to explain the why. So the older the workforce, explain why are we changing these things? Why are we putting these into place? Why are we looking at AI and what that can do for the company so that they're understanding like, okay, there's good purpose behind this. This is going to make your lives easier. It's going to make our lives easier. It's going to make the business work better. You have to explain the why. But you as a compliance person has to understand what the why is before you can explain it. And so I think that's super important as we start integrating and using AI even more because it's here. It's not going anywhere. And it's important that we embrace it.
Oh, no, we really, truly have no choice. I was speaking recently with another compliance professional who remarked that in his organization, they were requiring not only that everyone use AI, which is the direction that a lot of businesses are heading, but they were requiring training that was so deep and so broad and so time consuming. Specifically, each employee had to build their own agent. And they have an online training type of course where by the end of it, you know how to actually build an agent to do a thing, to do a task. Rebecca, would you feel that for your generation, something like that would be welcome? Like you would just want to jump in and sink your teeth into that kind of training?
Yeah, I would say for sure. Like, I think it's funny. I speak with compliance teams all day, and I would say it's really 50-50. People are either all for compliance or they're completely against it. Or sorry, not compliance, AI, obviously, everyone for compliance. But I think if you can't beat them, join them. I think there's so many practices in place to protect you against AI. But in reality, we should be embracing this change and we should be figuring out how to properly use it so it can help us in our day to day. I think, like Emily said, like we should be using AI to reduce like administrative tasks that we don't need to be spending our time on. But to even take it one step further, I think AI can really help people identify patterns that maybe the human eye can't see. Like, for example, going 5 years back into your case data and saying, this is really similar to the case that you're working on today. Here's what the outcome of that case is, and here's what we recommend. But I think where we need to draw the line is like the human element of it. And like, of course, I don't think AI should be making any final decisions, but it can definitely be used in guiding people in that direction.
That makes total sense. And back to that training again, when you think about it, if your workforce really has been trained on AI, aren't they then more able to identify the associated risks versus don't use AI and just hoping that your employees won't do it? Like the Gen X kids, you say, don't touch the stove when you're home alone, or don't watch certain channels on cable. Teach us the things we need to know so that we can be safe. I think that was his approach and his mentality towards it.
And I think as somebody who's maybe the only person that you're talking about, you're either for it or against it, I think that I am for like cautious use and adaptation, because I think that there are so many things that it can do and really help, like what you were talking about, Emily. But on the other hand, when people say we might not need a second person for an interview, or let's have Copilot, record everything in what could be, from a lawyer standpoint, a confidential meeting, if that comes out wrong, you can be harming yourself. Or if it's answering questions where it comes up with answers that thinking they know the policy. So I think for me, it's also making sure we use it responsibly in the ways that it works so it doesn't cause more work. I just saw a poll in the Wall Street Journal, and I forget, but the amount of time that CEOs thought that AI was saving versus the workforces was strikingly different. So making it efficient, CEOs are walking around saying, let's do AI for everything. And then the rest of the people and employers are saying the tools we have to do this in AI don't work. Does that align with some of what you both are seeing or feeling, or does that sound outdated? I'm just interested too. You can be totally candid.
So I think you're totally right, Lisa. It makes me think of, I don't know if you guys are the Pit watchers, but season 2 just came out and they actually just had an episode where the new doctor is using AI. And one of the younger doctors is like, but that's wrong. That's wrong. And you are assuming that the AI is going to catch it. And I think that loops back exactly to what you're saying, is we have to be very careful about how we're using it, making sure that it is not replacing the human element, like Rebecca was saying, but use it for things that would be time consuming on our part, but still have to have a human oversight to it, a human element, so that our work time is cut down significantly, but there's still oversight and overview from the human eyes, if you will. I think that's a way to find the balance right now, knowing that AI is going to continue to evolve and grow and change and be better than what we're seeing now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's funny because people always say AI is not always right, but from my perspective, neither are people. I think we're just so afraid of change, and like just because it's technology doesn't mean it's always going to be accurate. But I think even if a human being is doing a job, you should still be double checking it. I think regardless of what work is being done, I think it's always important to have a second set of eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, just to change tech a little bit, is I do a lot in the investigation space and speaking up and raising concerns. So I think about that a lot. And we have very traditional ways of doing this. I feel like there are ways to improve what we're doing for a more modern workforce. And I just was wondering what you all thought about speak up tools and technology for that, where we are. So, Emily, we'll start with you on that one.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's a bridge we still need to be paying attention to. It's multi-generational. I think, though, having options for people to still make phone calls is important because the older generations still want to be able to pick up the phone and talk to a person. On the other side of things, we need to be able to make it easily accessible. QR codes, quick links, text messages, things that make our younger generations more, yeah, I'll do that. I'll speak up. I'll say something because it's super easy. I just have to do this one thing. But I think across all of that, speak up culture and what goes on behind the scenes once the compliance team gets it needs to be way more transparent. There's too much historical, like black box, super confidential, like you make a report and you have no idea where it goes, what happens to it, where does it end up, what ends up happening. There's just too much silence around it. And I think transparency needs to be huge, way more open. And I think that leadership needs to live that behavior too. So they need to talk about like, oh yeah, I've spoken up before, or I've made reports, or I tested it. I called the hotline the other day, or I put in a hotline report just to see what would happen. I think speaking up is still important, but I think we need to make it easily accessible. And I think we just need to make it span as much as possible to get everybody involved.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think making the barrier to report really easy, of course, offering multiple reporting channels is super important just to make sure that you're catering to each generation and industry that might be wanting to submit something. But I think there's a really big issue in the speak up culture today in that it's almost seen as like such a big deal. Like I think if you even go on most company websites, it's like this huge in bold text, it says speak up here. And to me, that doesn't make me want to speak up. Like it should be normalized. It should be written in like normal font. I think one thing that, at least in my generation, we speak a lot about is cancel culture. And I think people don't want to be labeled as like a whistleblower. And I think labels are a really big thing in our generation, and it's almost about like your self-identity. So I think whistleblowing, or even, I don't even want to use that term, but just submitting a report, I don't think it should be viewed as something so extreme, and it should just be seen as part of like everyday accountability.
That's interesting. I don't think I've heard that point raised before. So it's really more just process than a big event. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. Like, I think it's just a way of communicating something that's happened. You don't technically know if it's a huge problem yet. Maybe it's just a question. There still needs to be like a full investigation on whatever's being submitted. So I think until that point, you're just making a comment. You're making someone aware of something that's happened.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's interesting too, as you talk about that, it goes back to what I was thinking about earlier, makes the point very well. You say, let's not, I hear what you're saying. And then the challenge sometimes is people will then say, I had no idea how and where to raise this concern. And then the reaction is, let's make it bigger. Let's show it more. And it's one of those things where you're absolutely right. We want it to be part of people's daily lives. But if it turns into telling on people or other things, it changes it. But I think it's an interesting, that's where I think sometimes we struggle on how to do that better.
Yeah, I think it's tricky and there's no like right or wrong answer. But I think just having multiple ways of reporting and, like Emily said, being super transparent about what happens after you submit that, I think will really help increase the number of reports. Not necessarily increase because more things are happening, but more people are reporting it.
Yeah. And I would, just to loop it back to what Rebecca said too, I think we have to absolutely move away from saying whistleblowing. That is a big, scary word. And
That's
nobody
a
wants
loaded
to,
term.
it's a loaded term, and nobody wants to be known as a whistleblower. I mean, cancel culture, whatever, like that's a tag, that is a label that sticks around. We were just talking, I was just listening to an Ethics First webinar today that was saying, like, if you blow the whistle at your company, that's what you're known for the rest of your career. And for regular everyday employees, that's the last thing they want. So we need to shift the narrative to say, I'm bringing this to your attention. I'm raising concerns. I'm highlighting, I think, an issue or whatever, and then leave it to the ethics and compliance team to determine whether it's actually an issue, if it's reportable, investigatable, whatever. but make it more of what Rebecca was saying, where it's just like, hey, I'm just bringing this to your attention. I think this is weird, or this just makes me uncomfortable, whatever. It's highlighting it. It's raising concerns. It's asking for help. It's not whistleblowing, and just leaving that word completely in the past.
Yeah. Give it a total marketing reframe.
I try not to use that word anywhere outside conversations that talk about it as whistleblowing as something that's been used regulatory. I also go one step further. One thing that's important to me is I do not like when people say that something's a report. I don't like hearing that someone made a complaint, because that to me is one of my pet peeves, because they're not complaining. They're raising an issue. And I feel like that word also matters a lot to me in terms of a small non-technical reframe of things, is that, and I'm amazed when people are like, oh, I'm dealing with this complaint. I'm like, they're not complaining. I don't know if you all see that as well.
I agree. We sometimes use the word allegation, and even then it's like, you're not necessarily making an allegation. It's a tricky line, and every company is so different in that way. But I think language is so important in this area, especially from a generational perspective. I know every single word that you use is analyzed so critically. So it's super important that we're creating a language and creating a safe space for people.
I like the way you said highlighting an issue earlier. That to me sounds like low stakes, easy entry, good way to frame what you're looking for. Highlight an issue. That's much friendlier than whistleblowing or complaint. I think Rebecca and Emily have some fantastic ideas. Back to the generational stuff for a moment. As we wrap, we've reached the half hour. What advice would you give to those of us who've been doing this for a while versus advice you might give to someone who's brand new in the field?
Let's have Rebecca start with this one.
I would say, I think my biggest piece of advice for someone who's been in the industry for a while, just stay curious, listen to the new folks, doesn't matter how old we are, but I think don't underestimate how quickly employee expectations are also changing. I think people have really high expectations now, and it's really easy for people to maybe go somewhere else as a result of not feeling heard. So it's really key to listen to what people are saying.
I like it.
Emily?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Rebecca said. I think reminding every generation in the workforce to stay curious, stay open to change, be willing to retire outdated processes, especially in companies that have been around for a long time. Sometimes it's just, we've always done it this way. Don't fix what's not broken. And it's not that it's broken. It's just that it's outdated and clunky, and there's a better, more intuitive or automatic way to do things. I think those are important. And then I would also say, listen, like what Rebecca was saying, listen to the younger generation, invite them into real decision-making conversations, not just like day-to-day busy work tasks or safe tasks. This field is evolving, and those fresh eyes and fresh perspectives can, I think, influence a lot of the decisions that have been made. And then on the opposite side of things, I think for people who are new, I would say, come on in. It's fun. Compliance isn't a scary word. Don't be intimidated, but get in, learn the business as deeply and as quickly as possible. Build those relationships, not only in your company, but across the compliance community. The compliance community is cool and awesome. And there's some amazing people out there who are willing to just chat about all things compliance. I have found that the community is very willing to share ideas and thoughts and what's worked and what hasn't worked, which is really cool. And yeah, just keep being curious and keep having conversations like this, I think.
Thank you so much. Those are all perfect, great thoughts and perfect things to think about, because I think we have a lot to learn as well. And one of the things I love about this ethics and compliance community, and you just said it, Emily, is that we all want to share. We have had experiences where we want to share that and help people, but we want everyone else also to be giving us new ideas and how do we move things forward and do things right for our employee bases, for everyone else. And yes, I'm biased. I think it's a really cool group of people to hang out with, just like I'm so grateful for you all to have spent some time with me today to talk about this. And I think we'll just keep this conversation open because I think it's a really important one. So on behalf of Corporate Compliance Insights, our podcast sponsors and Compliance Podcast Network and Hema and me, thank you all for being here today and talking about this. Have a good one.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.